So I really love this quote from UNHCR's senior advisor on diversity and inclusion. And what she really says is that innovation has always been important to our organization. The prime causes of our work haven't changed, but the issues have become more complex, and the old solutions simply aren't enough. So essentially, innovation has always been a part of the way UNHCR works, but we need it even more today because the challenges that we're facing are more complex, and we're working within a system that has more actors and more challenges. So I wanted to start today also thinking about the origin story. How did the service get built within the system that exists? So about 7 years ago, our former High Commissioner, now Secretary General, and our Deputy High Commissioner were interested in creating a space that could really capture and reward innovation within UNHCR. So they established a small team. It only started with 2 people, and it was really looking at how we could learn from the private sector and bring that into UNHCR's structure. So what we found is that over the course of the first couple of years, we really tested this idea of what could we learn from what the private sector was doing. How could we create new products alongside expertise that maybe we didn't have in-house. But with every origin story, you have an evolution. So what we found is that this actually wasn't the right fit. We were testing our assumptions and realizing that this wasn't the right way for us to innovate within the organization. So we went and started testing a new way for the team to work. At this point, we were about 7 people, and we started looking at labs. So how could we identify thematic challenges within the organization that really needed an innovation focus? So we established labs such as the education lab or the energy lab. And we started to build very in-depth relationships with different units in-house to work against these thematics. And we learned a lot from this approach to innovation as well. And what we found is that within these labs, a lot of the challenges became siloed. So where we are today is we've really stripped the service of the labs and tried to create this multifunctional approach. So when we think about challenges when it comes to connectivity for refugee communities, we're thinking about things such as energy and education in the same space. To have a connected learning center, you need to have energy and you need to have education colleagues involved. So what we've done is really tried to have a very systemic approach, a multifunctional approach to the way that we organize our team, and trying to understand better the complexity of the challenges which we face and how these challenges interact with each other. So we really started with just 2 people. Now we're 15 people across 3 different offices. So we have colleagues in Nairobi, Budapest, and Geneva. So that's just a bit about our origin story. So when it comes to innovation, one of the biggest lessons we've learned is that diversity and inclusion is everything. When it comes to creating new solutions or building on solutions that exist, diversity of thought, diversity of experience, who is sitting at the table is so important. And this is a quote that I love from our head of innovation, Chris. And it's our version of the truth is that if you're not making innovation accessible, making it inclusive, and encouraging diversity, then you're not doing what needs to be done to make innovation as effective as it should be. So when we're thinking about innovation, one of the first things that we think about is, all right, whose voices are we including in this? For sustainable innovation, you truly need to ensure that there's a diversity of thought, persons who are involved in the process. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but this is something that we continue to push within our organization, and something that has really shaped the way that we talk about innovation within the humanitarian sector. So one of the things that's really important to us is challenging these master narratives around innovation. So one of the things that the service really champions is trying to challenge this idea that innovation is about technology. And this is for a number of reasons. What we realized is that people within UNHCR did not think that innovation was accessible for a dozen different reasons. But one of the main reasons is that they thought that it was about technology, and they didn't think it related to their day-to-day work. So when we talk about innovation now, we always ensure that it's about a process. One of the things that we found as well is that when people were associating innovation with technology, they were associating innovation with men, usually. They had a very lofty idea that innovation is just a copy and paste of what they're doing in Silicon Valley. And this was a real barrier for us to be able to reach people in the field, and particularly women working at UNHCR, who we realized were not applying to our innovation fellowship because they didn't think that innovation was something that they could do. So one of the things we've really focused on in the past couple of years is challenging this narrative around innovation being only about technology, and also who an innovator is. Another thing that we really want to champion is that refugees and displaced communities, they're the ones that know their challenges the best. They should be the ones at the forefront of our innovation process, defining the challenge, feeding into the solutions, being the ones who make the decisions in this specific process. So when we talk about innovation, we always want it to be accessible, and we really want to find a space to have these conversations to challenge the master narratives that often exist within our communications. Another thing that we've really been working on is how can we use innovation to change behaviors and mindsets? So when we think about creativity or innovation, how can we actually make that accessible in a way to change behaviors? For example, if you're telling someone, be more innovative, what does that mean? When you're trying to change behaviors and mindsets around innovation within your organization, it's not enough to sit here and say, be more innovative, be more creative. You have to find different ways to create that pathway for somebody. So one of the approaches we've been taking is through different types of storytelling that actually create very action-oriented approaches to innovation. So we're not just sitting here telling colleagues, be more innovative, but we're telling stories about how a new program worked in Zambia, or how somebody in Egypt was able to bring refugees into their programming cycle. So by being able to actually show people, here, this path, you need to go this specific way to create impact within your situation, then they're more likely to understand how innovation is relevant for them and how they can take that into their day-to-day work. So a couple of different strategic priorities that we have as innovation service. One of them is culture and competency building. We're very, very passionate about building the competencies of our colleagues across the organization. And one of the ways that we do this is in our innovation fellowship. So every year we take 25 new staff or UNHCR affiliates, and we give them the tools and methodologies to actually implement innovation in their day-to-day work. So we have two different types of training that takes place, one in Bangkok and one in Istanbul. But the majority of the work that's done in the Innovation Fellowship is in their operations, where they're working with displaced communities and their colleagues over the course of 12 months. And for us, this is really about learning. It's not about actually taking out a project, but how can we understand what experimentation looks like in UNHCR? What are the different tools and methodologies that we have that can test our assumptions so that we can have the impact that we want for the communities that we're there to serve? So this is one of the most important things that we really believe when it comes to our role at UNHCR, because innovation does not sit within our team. It sits within every single colleague who is out there working with the community and trying to implement UNHCR's mandate. Another area that we work in is incremental innovation. So we want to understand what type of approaches are working and how can we test them in new and innovative ways. One of the ways that we've done this is the Innovation Fund. So when we have, for example, the Innovation Fellowship, which is really about trying to create a space for people to innovate in their day-to-day work, the Innovation Fund acts as a sort of safe budgetary space. Often colleagues don't have the opportunity to innovate because they don't have the funds to innovate. So this creates a space where people can test new ideas. They can really challenge some of the work that they're doing and test these novel solutions around areas that they otherwise may not be able to do. Another part of the Innovation Fund that we're really passionate about is the opportunity for us to use this to really support refugee innovation. So this is one of the projects that we supported in Tindouf, Algeria, actually. That was a new idea that one of the refugees in the community there came up with. And so the Innovation Fund is not only for UNHCR staff, but it also serves as a space where we can capture and reward refugee innovation throughout UNHCR. So the third strategic priority is disruptive innovation. So this is really looking at challenging the different systems and ways that UNHCR is working. So one of the ways that we do this is bringing in very novel solutions, things that really disrupt the way that UNHCR works on a day-to-day basis. This is our project Jetson. So Jetson basically is a predictive analytics engine that looks at how to predict movements of people in Somalia. So what we're trying to do here is actually change the way that UNHCR responds to emergencies. So if we're able to basically feed into the decision-making of our colleagues in UNHCR Ethiopia or UNHCR Somalia, who are responding to the movements of persons of concern, this is a whole new way of working with emergency response. It's not so much as reactive, but a proactive way to the way that we're working. The fourth one here looks at diffusion and scaling. And so one of the things that we want to do is to understand what is working and why, and how can we actually scale that to different parts of the house. We've done this with previous projects, and we're working really hard right now to scale two different initiatives at UNHCR. One of them is called Connectivity for Refugees, and the other one is the Humanitarian Education Accelerator. So these are projects that have really sat with the Innovation Service for a number of years, and we've identified the need and the different ways to try and scale this either to another part of the house or to a specific team who can then take ownership and really embed it in the way that UNHCR works. Another thing that we're looking at is how to actually scale our communicating with communities initiatives. So you'll see here, this was one of the projects that we did in Uganda, where basically we were testing assumptions around how communities in Bidi Bidi were actually receiving information and trying to create inherent feedback mechanisms so that their voices were being incorporated into the way that they were receiving information. So this fourth strategic section is really looking at how the things that are working, that we've tested, that we've proved, that we have the data to show really work, how do we actually work in-house to scale that as a proper initiative? So one last thing, we were basically asked if there was a question that we wanted to bring to the table and ask you guys. And so the one that we wanted to know is, with regards to diversity and inclusion, is this something that is really embedded within your innovation initiatives? It's something that we're really questioning and trying to understand within the entire UN system. So it would be great if, one, you guys were able to respond to whether this is something that you guys are thinking about, testing, experimenting with. And then if it's something that you want to continue having a conversation about, please message us and give us a shout, and we would love to learn more about what you're doing.